Yep. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm really excited to present this. We've been doing some research at Trumpet looking at trying to identify the prerequisite skills that might be associated with success in different Mand modalities. So as I mentioned before, you know how you get people, I've seen people get in big fights over this, right? And it should be sign, it should be pictures, it should be this, it should be that. And so Dr. LeBlanc and I have been working on really trying to set some data around that decision-making process. And we've got about 8 participants so far. This is a large-scale study, so we've got about half or a little less than half of what we actually really want to get, but we can present the data to you and kind of let you know where we're headed. So I'm going to skip over all this intro stuff because it is just a repeat of what we did before in the last presentation, and I just put it in there in the event there was somebody joining who hadn't joined at that time, but I'm just going to assume that you have that information and don't need it. So let me give you a little bit of background. As we know, children with autism and developmental disabilities certainly have limited functional language, and oftentimes that functional language limitation focuses on accessing or requesting preferred items and activities. So the Manding repertoire is limited. So what can happen is you often can get some problem behavior in place of Mands. So hit my head on the table is a great way to ask for that cookie. Punch you in the face is a great way to tell you to leave me alone. And so the strong recommendation in the literature is to target Mands in early intervention and make that a focus of your intervention. Now, as I mentioned, Mands have been successfully taught in a number of modalities to children with autism and intellectual disabilities. So certainly vocal is a modality that's common, sign language, and some sort of exchange-based or picture system. And there have been a lot of arguments for the benefits of each modality. So people have talked about, what are the pros, what are the cons. This is a study that looked at the comparison of the picture exchange communication system, which is a selection-based system, and sign language. It was written by Matt Tincani. It's cited pretty often. And he actually found that the usefulness of either modality really varied across students. Oops. And there wasn't a clear indication of the relevant characteristics that were associated with success in either modality. So it wasn't quite clear what characteristic led to success in the sign modality versus the picture exchange. So what we do know, and what we do know now, is that one option is unlikely to prove optimal for all children. So I know I've been guilty of this in the past, where I've been very supportive of one modality over another. My thinking has shifted quite a bit over the course of the years, and I really feel that one modality is not going to work best. You should let the child tell you which one works best, and hopefully as our science evolves and as our research evolves, we are finding ways to identify what modality is going to be most successful before we even get started. Great. Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, this was a study that was written in 2009 by Gregory and colleagues that looked at whether the presence of certain prerequisite skills. So you hear people say this quite a bit. You hear people say, well, motor imitation matches up with sign language, and picture or matching matches up with pictures. So if the kid can motor imitate, then you should choose sign language. Outside of this study, there's actually been no research to support that claim. And so this study attempted to do it. They looked at whether matching would be a prerequisite to a picture-based system, and whether motor imitation would be a prerequisite to an exchange-based system. And essentially, what they found was that, so they did a little quick, I'll tell you a little bit about the study. They did a little quick assessment. They did 10 trials of matching to see if the child could, match numbers to numbers. And then they did a quick motor imitation assessment too, that consisted of fine and gross motors, just to see if the individuals could imitate. And essentially what they found, this is a little bit of data from their study, but they found that when when both repertoires were intact on the assessment. So when a child was imitating and matching, that either response modality was mastered, and the picture exchange response was mastered more quickly. And so you're looking at a sample data set here of Dana. She scored at least 80% correctly on both matching and motor M, and you can see that she mastered both modalities quickly, exchange-based a little more quickly. And so they also found that when neither repertoire was present, that sign was never mastered. So if the individual didn't have either repertoire, sign was never mastered, and only one of the 3 participants mastered the exchange-based communication. So it's kind of an all or nothing, right? Like, you've got the skills, you're going to do just as well in either system. You don't have the skills, you're not going to do well in either system. And so what they didn't have is kids who presented differently. Like, kids either had the skills or they didn't. They didn't have kids who had one skill stronger than the other, and that is a really interesting thing to think about and interesting to look at. So the other thing about this is that the study did include an assessment of vocal responding, so which kids and what types of prerequisites would match up with vocal manding. This is an example of Tanya, who responded correctly on 20% or fewer trials in both of the assessments, and you can see she never mastered the signs there on the left, and she didn't do well on the exchange-based either. Okay, so the current decision making, as I mentioned, there's really not empirical evidence to support the choices that we make, and it's more than likely really based on our own history of reinforcement, right? So if you've worked with a particular modality for a while, you probably know that system very well. You probably had a lot of success by using that system, and so you're probably choosing it based on the fact that that behavior has been reinforced. It's worked for you. But there's really not literature to support that decision, those types of decisions. There's some hypotheses, but not yet to be supported by the literature. So we really wanted to do that with this study. So the purpose was to develop a brief assessment of students' prerequisite skills, and specifically we want to look at the echoic repertoire, motor imitation, and matching. And we wanted to determine if performance predicts the rate of acquisition in 3 of the most common response modalities, so vocal, sign language, and pictures. And so one of the things, we're working on this with a variety of our research endeavors at Trumpet, but one of the things we're trying to do is, we'd love to be able to go into a new consumer's home, sit down with that consumer, run an assessment, and say, all right, this is the modality that's going to work for you before we even get started. So sign is going to be best for you. Because as you guys probably know now, you probably pick one based on these rules that are kind of out there, and it might fail, and so then you got to pick another one, and then maybe you go back to the original one because that one's not working so well. We'd like to be able to do that, and that's how the assessment is set up, to be a very quick, brief assessment of prerequisite skills that hopefully will predict success in one modality. Okay, so far we have, as I mentioned, 8 participants, which is really exciting. We want it to be much larger, and we continue to recruit and work with our population pool to get more into the study. But you can see there's mix of girls and boys, and they're the little ones, the babies. We get the babies out there. They get to us very early, and so they all were in that 2 to 3 year age range, which is amazing. All have a diagnosis of developmental delay, so essentially they've qualified for services in the state of California through the state because they're meeting the criteria for a developmental delay. Whether that is autism or not is yet to be determined. It could turn into an autism diagnosis, or it could just be a developmental delay that is corrected with some good early intervention. And then a lot of Spanish speakers in the area that we're in, and so we did deliver the protocol in both Spanish and English, depending on the child's primary language. Good. So the setting was either in the home setting or in a center-based program. So we would work with the child wherever they were receiving services, whether that be in the home or in the center. Okay, good. So this is just an overview of our methods, and I'll walk through each of these. But at the beginning, we conducted a paired stimulus preference assessment and also a 1-minute observation of the child's behavior in the presence of the item, because we want to see if there were any pre-existing Mands. So we want to make sure we weren't choosing a Mand that the child already had in the repertoire. As I mentioned, we had 3 prerequisite assessments, and I'll show you what each of these looks like. I have some videos. That's good for a Friday afternoon, right? Watch some videos instead of listening to me. We had 3 prerequisite assessments, matching, motor, iminic, and echoic. The order of those varied. And then we had three of the Mand training procedures: picture, sign. Oh, that says pictures twice. Sorry about that. That should say vocal. Picture, sign, and vocal. And so I'll show you what each of those steps of the methodology look like. So we started by conducting a paired stimulus preference assessment, and we did that at the beginning of the study. We separated food from leisure items, and we tried to use food if we could. We had a couple participants that used leisure items just because of a lot of things we were talking about earlier: ease of delivery, quick consumption, that kind of thing. But we didn't combine them. We always separated those preference assessments. And we presented each pair one time. And so this is an example of the same preference assessment that you saw in the last presentation. Again, I wanted to get that pirate booty in there. But let me tell you how we used this. We used it to do 2 things. The first was to identify moderately preferred items that could be used for compliance and responding during the prerequisite assessments. And so, excuse me. We wanted to have some things that when we were working with the children, assessing their motor imitation, their matching skills, we could deliver, but weren't the things we were then going to target for as Mands. And then we also used the preference assessment to identify 3 relatively equally high preferred items that were used for Mand training. So in this example, this is actually a beautiful example of a preference assessment because they're all equal. So those 3 things were ranked equally. As you can imagine, if we would pick something that is not as preferred and assign it to one condition, and then the other 2 items were very preferred, you would probably see some change in responding in that modality, but not because the modality is the thing that is causing the change, but it's a motivational factor. So we always tried to identify 3 equally preferred items for assignment to those different modalities. Okay, and then these would be example of the moderately preferred ones that, again, just used for compliance and reinforcement during those prereqs. Okay, so we did a 1-minute observation. We had a picture of the item present, so if there was a picture exchange already in the child's repertoire, we would see that. And we essentially just put the item out and allowed 1 minute to lapse to see if the child could already vocalize or sign or engage in the picture exchange for that item, just to make sure it wasn't in their modality. Again, if they already could do a little bit of that and that the item got assigned to one of those conditions, you're sort of weighting that one condition over the other. So we wanted them all to have a fair chance and a fair shot. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the prerequisite assessments then. We did a random draw to minimize any order effects that we might see. So we didn't always do echoic and then matching and then motor imitation. We randomized them across our participants. We had 20 targets for each of the 3 assessments. One of the things that was common across all of the prerequisite assessment is that only independent responses were reinforced. So as I walk through the procedures, we did have a prompting procedure in place, but we only reinforced independent responses, and that's because we didn't want to teach the prerequisites during the assessment phase. We just want to see if they were there. If we had any kind of reinforcement for, prompted responses, we might actually have shaped up that prerequisite, and then that might not be a fair comparison. So only independent responses were reinforced. And we provided praise and a moderately preferred item just about every 3 to 5 trials for compliance with the procedure. So they're very quick assessments, which is cool. Okay, so this is what the matching assessment looked like. So we've done our paired stimulus preference assessment. We have done a 1-minute timed observation. Now we're ready to take a look at, can you match? So we had 10 trials of object to picture, or 3D to 2D. It looked a little something like that. You guys are all familiar with that common plastic vegetable kit from Walmart that everybody uses for their matching test. That's what we used, actually. And it had to be that exact group of vegetables from Walmart. And it got really funny because we have sites all over the country that are running this study. And so you got to tell them, like, you got to go to the Walmart. And if their Walmart didn't have it, you had to ship these vegetables across the country so somebody could participate in the study. But they were all the same. And then we did 10 trials of just 2D to 2D, so picture to picture. Essentially, we'd sit down with the consumer and say, match. And then we used a verbal, gestural, physical prompt hierarchy, so least to most. And then, again, we reinforced on the initial instruction only. So let me show you a little bit of what that looked like. I have a video here. Hopefully the audio is good, but you just let me know if you can't hear it or see it. This is these are just actors, but this is what that matching assessment looked like. Maybe. Is it working? No.
There should be a play button
No? Oh, just press play.
Yeah.
Pause. Play. I don't see it. Sorry.
It's an invisible
Do you look? You get to come on the screen now and wave to everyone.
Yeah. Hello. This isn't how I wanted us to meet.
Am I missing the play?
Yeah, we'll just exit and play it. All right, so here's how this is going to happen. Which one is it?
Oh, it is the matching. So right here.
This guy right here?
Mm-hmm.
Get ready, everybody.
Open your binder. Good job, Sarah. Match. Nice, matching. You got it. Match. Match.
So you can see the
Pretty
verbal or the
good.
gestural, and then if she hadn't done that, I'd physically
Match.
guide.
Match. That was pretty good.
Oh, and I should say there was a little error there because these videos were used for
Kinda
training
same.
purposes. We're training our team to integrity, and so we purposely made a couple errors. So I would have gone gestural and then physical, but you get the idea, right? Like this is an example of the 3D to 2D. We did this with pictures as well, 2D to 2D, just to see what their skills were. Can I just go back to that? I'm good now?
Please.
And
Yeah.
you're just going to stand there in case I need you
Yeah,
again.
I figured
Yeah.
this will happen.
All right, that sounds good. You just want to take over?
No, please.
Oh, let's see. Okay, great. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so the next one was a motor imitation assessment. We had 10 trials of gross motor movements, and then we had 10 trials of what we would consider more fine motor movements. And essentially, we just used the SD or the instruction, do this. Then we presented the model, and we followed a similar prompting hierarchy of verbal to partial physical to full physical, so least to most, and then reinforced again only on those initial response to the initial instruction, so not if we had to go to a gestural or a physical prompt. So let me show these, and maybe I am a guru at this now, so I can just click on it and it'll play.
Just press spacebar, highlight it, press spacebar.
Do this.
Oh, sorry,
Good
spacebar.
job, Sarah.
Oh, there we go. This is not an individual with autism. We are just actors in a play. She's a good actor there. Sarah Vise. She might even be out there listening
Do
today.
this. Way to go. Follow me.
Again, that was a little error in there. I
Oh.
should be saying do this. We purposely, this is a training video, so we purposely put in some errors. But you get the point. We go through the motor imitation. We just sort of see how they respond and record it. Okay, great. No? Play. Top right. There we go. All right. Very good. Okay, and then the Echoic Assessment essentially we had 10 trials of sounds, And then we had 10 trials of words, and these were pulled from the VB map. Some of you may be familiar with the ESA. We pulled it from those, so we used those initial sounds and word targets that are there. And we didn't include any kind of say, so there's no say ooh, say ah. It was just the sound of the word presented. Now, I'll talk about this in my limitations, but you might be already thinking about one of the limitations in that the 3 conditions are not completely matched because there's no way to prompt the vocal response. So in the other 2, we went through a prompting hierarchy, but here you can't prompt the vocal response, and so in order to match that condition to the others as best as possible, we just presented it 3 times. And then again, reinforced on the first one only. So I can show you a little bit about what that looked like. Oh, spacebar. Oh, there we go. They always get paused on the most like unattractive facial expressions that you could ever have.
Right. Good job, Sam.
Again, not a person with autism.
Wow. Wow. Way to go. That was awesome.
Okay, you get the idea. We're short on time, so I won't show the whole thing. But you understand, right? You get it. Present these sounds, present these words, figure out what happens. Okay. Good, so we went through those prerequisite assessments. We saw the type of responding they engaged in. And then we went on to our man training sessions, and this is what they look like. So we had 5 trial sessions. We assigned 1 item. I should have mentioned that. We assigned 1 item to each modality. So Skittles went to pictures, cookies went to sign, and fruit snacks went to vocal. And so we always did a little rule at the beginning. This wasn't the NSD or anything. This was just a little rule at the beginning of the 5 trial session to sort of state the contingencies. So if you want the cookie, you have to give me the picture. If you want the cookie, you have to make the sign. If you want the cookie, you have to say the word. That's what it looked like. Again, we randomized the order to minimize any order effects. Our mastery criteria were defined as 3 consecutive sessions at 80% or above. Termination criteria was 6 sessions past the point of mastery of the first modality and no increasing trend in any of the other modalities. So we want to make sure we didn't terminate before if a child was acquiring another modality. We only terminated if there was no increasing trend and we were past mastery of at least 1. Okay. Our man training procedures essentially went in much the same similar vein as what I showed you with the prerequisites, but we had the 3 modalities, the sign, a picture exchange, and Echoic, and we followed an independent model and physical prompt hierarchy for the sign. So we presented the item. If the child didn't emit the response, we'd model it. Didn't emit the response, we'd physically guide. And we provided praise and item at any level. So we did want to provide reinforcement here, right? Because we're trying to teach a Mand. We're trying to see how well they do with the Mand and our teaching procedures. The picture exchange was a little different. We did an independent gestural physical, and then the Echoic, we did an independent partial Echoic and full Echoic. Does that make sense? Yeah? Even for a Friday afternoon? Okay, I'll skip that video. It's essentially just a man training session. You guys got that. Okay. I do want to mention that we have collected Interobserver Agreement on all of the sessions. What I'm showing you here is just the percentage of sessions collected. So we collected IOA between 40 and 60%, a little less than 40 in some cases of all sessions, and our agreement was quite high. Okay, we also collected procedural integrity. I wanted to pull this data sheet out just to show you what it looks like. I think it's a really cool data sheet and a cool way to set it up. But essentially what we have here is the, am I allowed to go over here? Yeah? That's not okay. That's pretty good. I followed all the rules until the last like 20 minutes of the presentation. Yeah. Got it. I'm like, that actually sounds kind of fun. It's just, all right, I will stay on this side of, oh, that's sweet, okay. Great, then I'll show you over here. But this is really cool. So you have the students responding over here. So you're looking at how they're responding on the prerequisite assessment. This is an example of data sheet for the prerequisite assessment. And then you have your treatment integrity right here on the right. And so each trial is, did they present the item in the array? Did they say match? Did they wait 2 to 4 seconds between prompts? Did they accurately use the prompt hierarchy? And then you can calculate as you go. I don't know if you've been involved in treatment integrity before, but you can have like 15 data sheets going on at the same time and you get lost on the trial. So I mean, clinically, this is something you probably want to set up too, but it ended up being really cool. And we did that for all the phases of the study. Okay, so our procedural integrity, again, between 50 and 70% of sessions, and the majority of cases a little below 50 on some, and the overall average was quite high. So that means people were implementing the procedures correctly as the protocol was written, which is great. It's a good thing. Good thing for research, right? Good thing for clinical practice too. Okay, so let's look at the fun stuff. I'm going to show you some of the data. I'll show you a couple sample participants. And I might run back and forth just to trip those guys in the back up quite a bit. And so here's an example of Jim. You're going to see the prerequisite assessments identified on the x-axis there, and the percentage of correct responding along the y. And so we have our motor imitation, our vocal, and our matching. And you can see that Jim responded very well on the matching prerequisite assessment. So matching was a very strong skill for him. I'm showing you this data set because it's an example of one that we would call predictive. So his success in the matching very much so predicted how he did with man training. So let's take a look at some of that data. So take a look here. We've got 5 trial sessions along the x-axis and then the percentage of independent communication along the y. We have 3 data paths. Again, remember there is 1 item assigned to each modality. So we have the open squares or the sign. The closed triangles are pictures, and the closed in circles are the vocal or the vocal responding. And you can see that within 4 sessions, Jim mastered the picture modality, which is really cool. So that would be an example of a data set that was predictive, that we would then use clinically. If we can get enough information that these really are predictive, you'd be able to go in and just run this and say, all right, Jimbo, matching's going to work for you, so we're going to, or picture's going to work for you, so we're going to start with that. Okay, good. This next data set I'm going to show you is ALI, and ALI's was not predictive, so it means that the highest prerequisite didn't match up with that modality in man training. So same orientation to the graphs. You can see that she had some pretty strong matching skills, not as strong as Jim's, but pretty strong. But she was most successful with the sign modality and actually not successful with the picture modality at all. I'll show you some more data sets. This is a sample of Ellie. A lot of people look at this data set and they say, oh, I have an Ellie in my life. Everybody has an Ellie, right? She did not perform very well on any of the assessments. A little bit of matching skills. But really, when you think about matching, it's really zeros because there's a chance that you're going to get it correct. So anytime you see like a 20 to 40%, it's essentially a 0 because there's sort of the guess factor that goes into that. So we had some chance responding there, and she did well on the sign modality. So nothing about that prerequisite would have predicted success in the sign modality. It's an example of one that the one that was not predictive that we found. Good. I have another one that didn't match up. I'm going to show it to you because I think it's got some real interesting maintenance data. Same orientation. Again, Sam performed very well on the matching. And here are his data. His most successful modality was sign. Which was interesting. He did very well. He eventually mastered the picture modality as well. What we did with all of the cases is when we found a successful modality, we trained the other responses in that modality. So that was just sort of a clinical, like, let's make this happen kind of thing, because we didn't want to just leave the kid with no functional Mand repertoire. So we took the one that was previously assigned to the vocal modality and we assigned it to the sign modality and taught it up there. And then it was really interesting because we started to then do some maintenance probes, and that sign modality was not maintaining very well, but the picture modality was, because eventually Sam mastered that picture modality. So the only one we had to, we chose sign because it was faster for that third one, got it, and then anyway, we kept on doing maintenance trials. We kept on redoing some training to see if we could get that sign one back up to speed. But then we kept on doing the maintenance probes, and that picture one just maintained perfectly, but the sign didn't. And so in the end, clinically, we actually recommended that because there was such a severe maintenance problem that this kid should probably be using a picture exchange. But anyway, it's just an example of one that was not predictive. This is Garrett. Garrett was a cool kid who really had a lot of skills. Everybody hopefully has a Garrett as well. Matching was the strongest, but they were all pretty comparable. And check out his data. I mean, you know, he mastered the picture most quickly, but the others weren't very far behind. So this is following a lot of what Gregory found in that study with when you've got them, you see some nice success. You know, there's a couple trial difference between the mastery criteria, between the mastery, but when you don't have them, it's sort of hard to predict which one's going to be successful, how quickly, and maybe it's going to take a long time to get there. Okay, great. I'm doing good. I think I caught up a little bit. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. Good. So let me talk a little bit about the results and the analysis so far. Again, I really do want to emphasize this is a big scale study, so I'm going to talk a little bit about correlation coefficients, but don't, you know, we can't do that too quickly because we have 8 participants, and one number in that data set can really change the correlations quite a bit, but we'll present them and talk about them. Okay, but what I'm showing you here is the participants and then their strongest prerequisite skill. Interestingly, for all of them, their strongest was matching. When we did the correlation coefficients, we adjusted for that, you know, the responding that, you know, just naturally happens in matching, and we didn't see a difference in the correlation, so that's cool. And then I have the lowest sessions to criterion. So how many sessions did it take to get them mastered in that modality? So for Jim, you see 100% matching. And it took him 4 sessions to mastery for pictures. Harry, 100% matching, 3 sessions to mastery. Garrett, 95, 3 sessions to mastery. And Andy, 95 and 16 sessions, which was the fastest for Andy. And so, cool. So those are the ones that were predictive of the 8. We saw 4 of them being predictive in that way. Okay. So I don't want to, it's really hard to talk about correlation coefficients on a Friday afternoon. Although on the West Coast it's still early, so you know, maybe you guys are still okay with it, wherever you are. But we did calculate Pearson R correlation coefficient, and we wanted to examine correlations between the prerequisite scores and the sessions to criterion. So those were our 2 numbers. If you're not completely familiar with correlation coefficients, essentially they range from -1 to +1. So values that are close to -1 or +1 are going to indicate a negative or positive linear relationship respectively. Closer the correlation is to 0, the weaker the relationship, and anything less than 0.6, no relationship. And so sorry about that. Here's our correlation. I thought there was some animation there. Here's some correlation so far. And so we have matching and pictures at a -0.42, echoic at a -0.35, and motor imitation at a -0.2. And so what we're finding, what that means is we're finding moderate to weak correlations. Matching is showing to be the most predictive, echoic the next, and motor imitation the least. So essentially, you know, we're looking at the higher the score in the prereq, the lower sessions to criterion. And again, we're also finding, again, a little bit similar to what Gregory was finding, when you have a kid who has all of those skills, there's not really a whole lot of difference in the modality, in the success in the modality. Good. We're also finding that if it's above 50%, and this could be useful later down the line, if it's above 50%, that they're likely to master that modality. So if a child is matching at 50% or above, or motor imitation at 50% or above, then it's highly likely that they're going to master the modality. So that could be helpful in the future well too. Like if thinking clinically, okay, how might I use this? I conduct the assessment. As long as I've got above 50%, we're going to be okay. It's going to be okay in that modality. Awesome. Certainly the age and variability in skills is an extension of the Gregory study. So we had some younger consumers who had some pretty variable skills, which is pretty cool. Cool little extension. Okay, so future direction. So we're definitely, as I mentioned, seeing this as a large scale study. We want to get some more participants. We are also wondering if there are parts of the assessment that might be more predictive than others. So for example, maybe there's a part of that prerequisite assessment like the fine motor that's more predictive than others. And so we could easily pull those chunks out and run the correlations and see. For example, maybe, and this just hypothesize, maybe the 3D to 2D is a little bit more predictive of success because essentially that's what you have happening in a picture modality, right? Like I've got a 3D item and a 2D picture, so who knows? We could look at that and see, but I think there's merit in doing so. Limitations I talked about. Again, I think probably the biggest limitation, although there's no way around it, and it's probably the reason why Gregory didn't include it in their study, is that vocal assessment is the echoic prerequisite assessment. You can't match it to the others. So there was no prompting hierarchy involved. It was just presenting the sound or the word 3 times. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there. And then a prompting strategy with the picture exchange. We noticed this pop up with some of our participants, and maybe it's something that happens clinically as well, but because it was a least to most, we had some of our kids who started gesturing to the item instead of picking it up, which I think delayed their acquisition a little bit. So, because that's what we were doing, right, pointing to it. And so, in some ways we were getting a Mand, but it's not going to be depicted in the data because that's not what we were looking for. So, just a little note there for future research changes to the protocol. Extensions, so good. So one of the things that's real exciting is we are now working with a postdoc in our company who is really interested now in looking at, okay, if you have this prerequisite assessment, what are the other factors that you should consider in choosing a modality, right? And so we may have a situation where we have a kid like Harry, if that's who I called him, who has really strong skills across the board. He's doing well in all of the modalities. And so which one do we choose then? And so she's looking at assessment of community support and resources and family support, how socially valid the modality is. So if the consumer is going to use it in the real world, how are people going to accept that and reinforce it and shape it? How to make the most impactful decisions, right? Because this is an area, if you go wrong on it, if you pick the wrong modality or you pick one that people aren't going to follow through with or the child's not going to be successful with, it really impacts programming. And it impacts programming and success for quite a while. And then, there's certainly, it feels like every conference I go to or have been to within the last year, there is an entire symposium, if not 2, on technology and all these really cool ways to incorporate technology, particularly into manned modalities. So you're starting to see things with iPads and all these really cool things, and there's not a lot of research on that, right? And so it could be that we can incorporate some other prerequisite assessments of things that might need to be in place in order for those new pieces of technology to be successful manned modalities. Wow, I did it! That's awesome! And I have 5 minutes for questions. Woo!